Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're watching AMTV Alternative Media Television. I'm here with attorney Bruce Fine. Tell us about your relationship with Edward Snowden.
Well, I've been representing his father, Lon Snowden, now for several months, since a month or so after the disclosures made their way across the mainstream media. And it's been very exciting to see and awaken the American people to the danger of a police state and secret law that's totally anathema to government by the consent of the governed. But it's clear that this is a long-term battle. The American people have to be engaged because, unfortunately, our members of Congress and the executive branch are totally deaf to the requirements of the Fourth Amendment and the Constitution. But that's what the Founding Fathers encountered as well. It was a long struggle from the stamp tax to 1776, but we're willing to endure for that period as well in this time and place.
So what's next for Edward Snowden? Last I heard he's in Russia indefinitely. What does that mean? I mean, is he still going to have a life?
Well, we don't have any more information than what you can read in media. There may be a trip at some time. But at present, he's got asylum. President Putin has explained in an interview that he will not hand Edward back to the United States. There is not any extradition agreement in play. But I think in some respects the game has been returned to the United States. The disclosures have sparked the national conversation that Edward said that he was hoping to animate when he spoke with Glenn Greenwald on television from Hong Kong. And now it's really up to us to carry the baton forward. He displayed the courage that was needed to substitute for the members of Congress who were derelict in explaining what was happening to the American people. And now we need to move forward with legislation and legal accountability for those who are involved in invading our rights.
Now, there's been speculation that there's a connection with Edward Snowden to the Russian government. Any information on that?
No, I don't. I know of nothing that would substantiate that kind of idea. And in some sense, I say we need to think of the larger picture, which is we need to worry about what our government is doing. President Obama needs to worry about his spying on us, not making obeisance or pleas to the international community. That's what's wrong with the United States. We do what we do as a people because of what it says about us. Don't tell us about what other people are doing. What did our government do that was wrong? Because between the potential evils of government lawlessness and private lawlessness, by organizations or otherwise, when the government becomes a lawbreaker, then all of our liberties, our entire idea of a democratic dispensation is endangered, and that's where the preoccupation has got to be. So we shouldn't distract our attention from the overall evil that was disclosed by Mr. Snowden's efforts.
And no doubt he did disclose a lot of evil. Things that a lot of Americans thought were already happening to us now has been brought out to the open, and this has been maybe the story of the century. Should there, however, be some punishment for releasing confidential information, working for the NSA or being a contractor of the NSA, should there be some kind of punishment for that?
The first thing I'd like to say is that there should never be punishment for disclosing information that shows government illegality. In my judgment, it's protected by the First Amendment. The government can't make it wrong to disclose that the government is violating the law. That's just outrageous in any kind of democracy. Now, when we go beyond that, I think you can't be categorical. We wouldn't want people to disclose the locations where our troops are stationed, which could place their lives in jeopardy. That's really not what I think this disclosure was about. It's about the policy itself, about gathering information. And I do think that there ought to be a requirement in the law that if you are punishing information disclosures, the government should prove some kind of concrete harm. We remember from the Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning sentencing proceeding that despite the massive disclosures by WikiLeaks of classified information, the government was unable to show even one person on the planet whose life was threatened by the disclosure. If you're going to make this that kind of a serious crime, you have to show that there was a serious harm. You remember that Robert Gates, who was then Secretary of Defense, shrugged his shoulders about the disclosure and said, "This too shall pass." And so I think that if there are going to be any kind of government sanctions for disclosing information, the standard of proof of harm should be a very exacting one. Not impossible to surmount, but very exacting.
What do you think the motivation was for Edward Snowden to release this information? Because we can argue this has legitimately maybe ruined his life. I mean, I've heard statements kind of along those lines from his father. Is this an ongoing trend as we see people like Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, Bradley, now Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden? Is this something we're going to see a lot more of, do you think?
We don't know. I think that the pressures, the dynamic behind these kinds of disclosures have come about because Congress has become derelict in its job. After all, the Congress knew of the things that Edward Snowden disclosed, but they chose to remain silent despite the obligations they have to the American people in the U.S. Constitution. If Congress is restored to its true oversight, I think the pressures for this diminish to virtually nothing. You didn't have these years ago when I first came to Washington, when there were real oversight hearings. And when Congress then becomes nothing but an inkblot, then there becomes surrogate scope, not only the people who work for the government as contractors or subcontractors, but for the media itself. And it's been unfortunate. I mean, I talked to members on the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. They learned more about what our government is doing from WikiLeaks than from the oversight hearings.
Oh, sure.
Really? I said, this is utterly ridiculous. So I don't think we can give a categorical answer. If the institutions are reformed, then the dynamic will lessen the pressure for these kinds of revelations. But if it stays in its backward sort of petrified forest mold that just does nothing, then there are going to be efforts that try to take up the slack.
Tell us about your new book.
Well, the book that that I've spoken of and will be selling today, American Empire Before the Fall, and I hope to be writing a sequel. The most important thing to understand about where we are as a country is that we've forgotten the psychology of a democracy, which is we take risks other people don't take. We care about due process. We understand the limits of our ability to change other people, so we don't go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. It's not because we're callous, but part of wisdom, a part of our nature of a people is to recognize limits on our own ability to do good, and recognizing that the cure comes worse than the disease when you think that you're infallible and can change centuries, if not eons, of culture and ethnicities abroad.
So that's a big question, you know, in back to the leak and Edward Snowden a little bit. Now that we have this information, we know it's relevant, we know it's factual. What should the American people do with this information?
They need to go and they need to campaign and write their members of Congress, pass resolutions at the city council level, and hammer and say, I will not vote for you unless you repeal this monstrous spying on Americans. Again, we're not talking in this case spying on Petrobras or foreigners. These are Americans who pay their salaries, who abide by our laws, who give legitimacy to the government itself. And they need to make clear if that member doesn't vote to abolish the program, they will never get their vote, they'll never get a contribution. And that works, just like the American people have made clear vocally they oppose any military force in Syria. And the President of the United States flinched, and members of Congress largely came back and they changed their minds too. It's got to be active citizenry. And moreover, they have to feel pride in exercising that responsibility, if you will. It's part of the earmark of being an adult, that you control the destiny of your country. And Tom Paine said, a patriot saves his country from his government. And that's what they need to feel about that, so that they have to, in some sense, surrender creature comforts, the idea that the goal of life is just money and power and, hey, just a comfortable retirement, and saying, no, the real goal in the United States is the thrill of exercising the powers of self-government by my participation. Freedom is participation in power.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. Bruce, thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Great. Thank you.